Hi, everyone. Welcome to this talk on effective test automation for developers, or how I like to call it also, treat every test like it was a unit test. Before going into the talk, I'd want to express my gratitude for the people without of whom we would not be here. And the people are all the organizers or the volunteers. And I'd actually want to give a big hand for all the organizers and volunteers also right now. Because it's massive amount of work that they're doing just for us to be here. So, I'm Aki. I love T-Turtle t-shirts. So I love different kind of t-shirts. Being a lead developer, today I was being referred as to be a tester in developer wrapper. And I actually had it there. I loved it. That was a phrase from LinkedIn today. But that's the boring stuff. So in this talk, what we're going to do is I'm going to walk through a model of how to test any unit. So I go from unit testing, so how to test any unit. Then we learn how to draw boxes. And then we ask questions on each of these boxes based on the model that we learned on step 1. This is what this talk is all about. All right. So imagine an app to reserve a seat in a movie theater, like this, for example. Just imagine an app like this, where a person can see available seats and also book seats. The internals of the app is not just the React front end for us. So let's look at that a bit. So we have a user can see available seats and then can book a seat. And in order for this to be event-driven microservice, we need 2 microservices for this. So there will be a message sent to book a seat for the other service over here that will then reserve updated seats for the API that will send the seats back to the front-end applications. Does this really need 2 services? If it's this small, most likely not. But for the sake of event-driven microservices, this is what it is. So the components do communicate through AMQP. It doesn't matter what the communication channel is, if it's REST, if it's AMQP. The things that I'm going to share with you today, it doesn't take sort of into consideration what is the communication protocol. So it's a RabbitMQ what we have there. So imagine that we start building this app. How would we do it? Test first, while also making up the walking skeletons, like just the architecture skeletons, tests first. Sort of how to validate the design and building the automation capability while doing it. All right, let's talk about unit testing. Who knows the first principles of unit testing? Who've heard of this? Fast, independent, repeatable, self-validating, and timely. So the challenge of this is sort of how to create such test cases that only fail when they actually are supposed to. And this is also the most important, for me, this is the most important slide of the whole talk. So if you want to remember one thing, remember the name Sandy Metz. She has the most awesome talks about programming, about design. And her book and her talk, Magic Tricks of Testing, is basically what I'm sharing the model of. And the model is this. So what Sandy does in the talk is that she defines the messages that we're sending, divides those by type and by origin, and creates this 2x3 matrix. Here's the end result, but we'll go through these one by one. So let's talk about this message origin, these one by one. And we talk first about queries. There's like one of the important thing is the message type difference, whether it's a query or a command. And what is the difference between query and a command? Query returns, command has a side effect. Changes something. So it says that the incoming query, what you do is we assert the return value. And I will describe what is the incoming sent to self and outgoing next. So let's imagine, so this is one exercise, code exercise that I do quite often with teams and in meetups, where we're testing an ADM that has a change method. So imagine that we are sort of within the bounded box of the ADM, within the boundaries of ADM. When someone calls the change method, that is an incoming query, incoming message. And change is something that it returns in this exercise. So a change has it takes like a cents, and there's like available coins as a coin changer. And by the way, do not model money with integers, right? That's also an important part of this talk. So how do we test this? We send the method change, and then we assert the return value of what change actually does. Pretty easy. We all learn how to do this. So that was the first one. Incoming command. It says assert the return value of the direct side effect. And the direct is here the important. So if the side effect, if I'm sending a message change, and this side effect happens here in a database, is it direct? It depends. If we're talking about unit tests, most likely not. So how would we do this in this exercise? I often have a set coins, and there's a catch with the name. I'm trying to trick people that they would create a getter for these things. But how I typically want to do this, and when I'm focusing on the behavior, how to test this is I'm sending the set coins, and then I'm seeing what is the behavior that has changed. And I do that by asserting the return value of the direct side effect. So sending set coins, and then sending the ADM change again. So 2 gone, 4 to go. And the message is sent to self. Sandy says in her talk that you don't test them. And the messages sent to self are basically just private methods or such. And she says you don't test them unless it makes sense. So the next one is outgoing query. We go this very quickly, but we will learn how to look at this later in bigger scale. And Sandy argues that we don't test this. We don't explicitly test this. So what we instead do is that whenever there comes an incoming query or an incoming command that will send an outgoing query, what we do is, so here, for example, in this example, there is a collaborator that has available coins. And in the withdraw method, now it changed to withdraw, by the way, not change anymore. So the withdraw method will send some collaborator a method to get the available coins. So what we do is we inject a dependency with a stop. Make the stop to return something sensible. And then the call to the dependency is implicitly tested by making the call, the original call. So we test the outgoing query implicitly by testing the incoming query. So here you see in the top, we inject the stop. In this case, it's on the line 3 and 4. And then just by sending the ADM withdraw, we test that we're actually sending the message to the stub 2. So that's what Sandy says, that we don't test that we're actually sending the message, because that would tie the implementation to too much with the test. And the last one is that we verify that a message is being sent. And this is if there's an outgoing command. So in ADM withdraw, for example, I say I want to have 5 euros. Someone somewhere wants to deduce 5 euros from my bank account, for example. So again, there's the change method. Again, it's changed now. And we are sending the method withdraw to the withdraws collaborator in this case. And how to actually test this is that we inject the dependency as a spy or a mock. Either works fine. And in the test, we verify that the message is being sent, like this. Why I talk about these things that some people might think this is so basic. It's just basics of unit testing. This is like, we all know this, right? This is something that has helped me a lot. This is a model that helps me personally. And it doesn't only help me with unit tests. It helps me a lot when I'm thinking testing overall. This model that I used. So how I sort of use this model, whenever I'm thinking on, I want to test something. Whether it's a unit, whether it's a component, whether it's a sort of big test, big box test. I imagine a box around the unit. Then I'm thinking the message I'm sending, is that a query or is that a command? Does it have an outgoing query or a command? And then I remember whatever happens inside, I don't care. So 4 steps. Imagine a box around the unit. And the box can be small, or the box is big. And what I argue is that the model that I showed, the model by Sandy Metz, works whether the box is small or whether the box is big. And here lies the magic that I have learned to really appreciate on this model. So again, once more, Sandy's 2x3 matrix. As you might see, I love this matrix a lot. And then, like visually, what I created for this talk. Also, it's sort of a smiley face for me. At least that's what I see there. That's quite neat. All right, back to the app. You remember the app. Reserve a seat in a movie theater, having 2 services and a RabbitMQ in the middle. So let's validate the architecture a bit with the test, meaning that I can test the architecture. I can combine things together. I can create an application where all these things work. That there is a way for me to send message through the web to the API, database, or backend, back to the API and web. And to test this, I came up with a custom health check. All this code, by the way, is in GitHub repo, and if you want, I can add the links into the GitHub repo to the Slack on the conference. So a custom health check. So there is a get endpoint that sends a get health check and then responds to status OK. This is just to check that, yes, I have a backend up and running. Doesn't really see that if I can have all the components separately running and integrated nicely. So I also created a post health check that sends a health check to the backend that will make the call, send stuff also to a RabbitMQ. The backend part then listens for the RabbitMQ and responds through another queue back to the originator. And then the API part will listen this other RabbitMQ and send results through the WebSocket, because this is the architecture that I'm sort of using. I'm like doing HTTP calls, then things go through RabbitMQs, and then back to WebSockets. At this point, I want to talk a bit about testing strategies that we have. So there are these, we know the testing pyramid with end-to-end tests at the top, some component test unit or integration test unit tested in the bottom. It's not the only testing strategy that you might choose. I'm just saying that depending on your context and your environment, sometimes testing cone might make more sense for you, or the testing our class. Then there is the other thing, what does end-to-end test mean? And what I think, personally, is that what I think about what end-to-end test means is something that you should not care. What I think is important is that in the teams where I work, we know what we mean with end-to-end tests. That we know what we mean with component tests. And the same with you. We might not even talk about end-to-end test or unit test. We might just talk big test, small test. Just having a common vocabulary and thinking like, how do we want to drive the test, and how do we want to verify that all the pieces work together nicely? This is sort of yours to decide within your teams. And how to use these things, so how to use the model and thinking on the possible testing strategies. So now we get into the where I show like how the destroying the boxes and just making it big or small, thinking about the model, is very useful for me. What boxes do you see? Anyone? Just shout if you want. What sort of boxes do we have here?
The entire slide?
The entire slide is one box. Exactly. That happens to be the first one that I had here. This is exactly the thing. We can sort of imagine boxes, and whatever sort of is within the box, we apply the sort of 4-step process and the 3 questions. So we have the entire slide as end-to-end here. We imagine the box, we take the visualization, and we think about, for example, the get health check from the UI. Just me clicking in the UI, pushing like get me health check. It is a command because it has a side effect. It does not have any outgoing commands or queries, so everything happens inside. And whatever happens inside this box, I don't care. Does it make a DB connection? Does it add something on the DB? I don't care. That's just behavior. And if it would have that, then I would need to test that with some other means in there. So we test this by sending a message through UI, click, and asserting that something has changed in the UI. Right. Imagine a box, big box. Everything is within the big box. How about the post-health check? Post-health check goes from the API. Again, it's a click where I can type something. Goes through the API. It goes through RabbitMQ to another service, then through another RabbitMQ queue back to the API, and then sends back things through WebSockets. Again, it's command. It changes the state, but it does not have any side effects. Oh, sorry, it does not have any outgoing messages. There's no arrows pointing out of this box. So we tested similarly. We sent the message through UI, and we assert what has changed in the UI. Pretty sort of normal things. But let's draw some other boxes. How about these boxes? I deliberately actually draw also the RabbitMQ to be partly sort of within the box. This sort of looks like component tests for me, and as I said earlier, what these are don't really matter. The important thing is how you would name these in your environments and in your teams. Let's take a look at this, for example, as a use case, how we can use the model in these things. Because all these components are different. They have different characteristics. So let's take one, the backend, because this was the sort of the easiest of here. So there's one message coming in through RabbitMQ. There's some magic happening in there, and then there's one message going out. Again, remembering the visualization in here, and we see the health check. It is a command. It's saying like, do something. It does have an outgoing command. It has an outgoing command, so an outgoing message. And what happens within the box, we don't care. Again, if there's any database calls, anything like that, we don't test that unless we want to check that. That, for example, in the response, it says database is connected. So we test it by sending a RabbitMQ message and verifying that a message is sent to another queue. And this is a test that we want to check explicitly the RabbitMQ and the backend component working together. The REST API of the bookings, there's two cases here that I will go through. One is through the coming from the HTTP layer, and that will send, from the HTTP, that will send to RabbitMQ. And also what we have is that we get another message from the RabbitMQ that will post stuff to the WebSockets. So let's look at these two examples. So from like the post health check point of view, it's both query and a command. Because HTTP endpoint, it returns, post typically does return something, and it's also a command. It does have many outgoing messages. It actually sends WebSocket connections in my architecture and my design in here, and it also sends to the RabbitMQ. So we test by sending this post message, and then we verify that these messages are being sent. Now we're actually going to see some code. In here, this is the easy sort of query part of post. So we're sending health check, and then we're expecting 200 OK with like some specific response that says WebSocket status is OK, and there's X amount of connections, and the X is more than 1. And then on the other side, what we can also check is that when the moment that I'm sending this post command, it also immediately sends through the WebSockets like a live health check heartbeat. And what I'm sort of doing here is I heard like quickly and previously there was something about DSL. So what I have tried to done here is write the test cases as easily readable as possible in this case. That it's sort of spying on the WebSocket stream, and then I'm just sort of checking that I should get health check events with payload that matches to a subset of like this. And then the next one is like getting the RabbitMQ, and that should send stuff into WebSockets. Again, it's a command. It will like saying from the RabbitMQ says okay, this is the health check status coming from all the other places. Please report this through the WebSockets to all the clients. And what happens within the box, we just don't care. So again, the same thing. Incoming command that has an outgoing command. This is how we test it. So we're sending the message through RabbitMQ, and then we are verifying that stuff is going to be published through the WebSockets. And the code looks pretty much the same as earlier, with the difference that I am creating an AMQP producer and then actually sending. And this actually does send a message through RabbitMQ in this situation. I'll show one more box, draw one more box. We don't get through the things, but we can also draw a box through the whole sort of backend part. Think that as a whole. And this is just to show you that there's ways for us to think about imagining a box around a unit, and the unit can be anything in there. So this sort of looks like booking, like the whole backend stack in there. And we do the same questions in here. We test by sending post, verifying that the message is sent back through the WebSockets. This is sort of learnings that what we did test things like this with one client of mine, where we did send a lot of the testing happened through sending things through RabbitMQ and doing these things exactly how I shared. And what was sort of amazing was we had tests and scripts where we did set up everything and everything run on Docker. And then, of course, we had the tests that we run on just on the memory, and that I can easily run with my IDE. And this is one of the things to consider when thinking about the testing strategies that we want to have. Do we want to run things on Docker, or in what kind of environment we want to run sort of what tests that we imagine a box around? I had a conversation with Maaret Pyhäjärvi earlier, that was last year. And when I showed her this and the team, what she said was, this is exactly what testers also see, but they use different words. That instead of queries and commands, they might talk more about visibility and control. And this sort of helped me to realize something. That the scripts that we're doing, let's say that we're creating these scripts and running things so that we have the containers running and we have a RabbitMQ running through Docker, and I'm just running these scripts through RabbitMQ on these test cases. What I can do is I can start running a lot of messages through RabbitMQ, and at the same time just looking what happens in the application. I broke our server so many times. So many times I broke the whole server. But then I had ways to replicate the situation, and that is super useful, because then it's easy to actually find the root cause and fix it. So all the scenes that we sort of create when thinking about these boxes, these do offer boundaries for us for visibility and control. And this provides us these places where we can start sending messages and using our exploratory testing skills to see what's happening in there. And that's actually, I think, a magical thing. And that's sort of pretty much it. It looks like this is going to be a short enough talk. I hope you enjoy that. There's going to be a longer break for everyone. That depends. Okay, cool. But steps to figuring out what to test. 3 steps. First, remember Sandy Metz. And if you really, really want to remember her name, I will just do a mind trick with you. So this is an invitation for you. If you really want to remember her name, when I count to 3, you say her name, you get like different synapses connected in your brain. So this is an invitation for you just to remember her name. 1, 2, 3, Sandy Metz. Remember this, super useful. Step 2, let's draw some boxes. You see a lot more boxes now than in previously. This is just to show you that the red ones, for example, can be thought of as contract tests. There's one that you don't necessarily see. This one is just testing the application running in memory that doesn't actually send anything through RabbitMQ, but is using everything within the application. So these are the tests that we do normally also. These are the test sort of strategies I chose not to talk today. And the ones that I showed you where I'm actually running things through also using the infrastructure. Remember Sandy Metz, draw boxes, and the last one, ask questions. That's pretty much it. Thank you.
Talking of asking questions, would you like to know whether the audience has any questions
Yes,
for you?
if there's any.
Is there anyone here who has a question for Aki? Okay, so for the recording, I would like you to speak your question into the catch box. I'm going to throw it to you. I'm going to have to throw it one-handed because is the catch box on? Yeah.
Hello, just wanted to say fantastic talk, really enjoyed that. Question for yourself, as part of this, while you're doing it in, say, an existing application, have you found any issues with, say, you notice it's sending messages out to, say, a database or anything? In the component unit side, would you think of mocking that, or would you come up with some sort of abstraction around that, or basically how have you handled that part to make it a true unit test?
So if I just want to rephrase though, so that I understand the question. So when thinking about the testing existing applications, so the example came from existing application that I went to work with. So when testing database, do I mock the database or just use the database as itself? Was that the question?
Yep.
How I imagine this thing is when I'm drawing the boxes, if the box would be sort of just this part, or what I could say like this part, I would think the database is outside of the box. Then I would mock the adapter for the database that would lie here, and I would mock that. I would run the application with the fake adapter to a database, and then I would sort of do it like that. If the box would be this, I still have two options. Like if conceptually I'm thinking that no one else but this should know anything about the database, I could even argue that I just use the database because there is running a RabbitMQ also. It requires to be run on Docker, for example. But if there would be a situation that this sort of writes into a database that someone else reads from that database and from that table, it actually turns out to be an arrow outside from this box, in my sort of thinking. And then I would really test that this sort of data is going to be changed. Does this answer to your question?
Oh, it does. That was great. Like you're kind of describing they're coupled together. One is querying, they're passing messages, but via a database.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thanks very much.
Who has another question for Aki? I'll try. It's going to be a long throw. Let's give him a round of applause, folks. That was a good big throw.
Thank you for the talk. Can you go back to the Marit slide with the visibility and control? We didn't see that for long enough for me to absorb it. Thank
This.
you. Yes.
This.
Not a question, just a request. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. I really enjoy you making this request. Thank you so
I
much.
walked in as you were showing this slide because I had to duck out. I wonder if I have a question. Why do we check if makes sense twice on the right-hand side? What does that mean?
Like visibility is... No, it doesn't make sense. I think it doesn't sort of message sense. So I think the check if it makes sense. So the idea here in this control most likely would mean that I would go and do stuff on the database and then see what happens. This is interesting. I think I will just modify this slide a bit and rethink if it makes sense.
Any other questions or indeed requests?
Here's a question.
Great throw, great catch.
Okay, he was talking to me, so I missed a bit of the answer of the first question. It is wrong. Maybe you already said this, but if your unit, if your box includes your service and your database, do you test what are the side effects on the database? Because one example I'm thinking is like you don't commit your transactions, and everything works. The input and output are perfectly the same, but you haven't written anything on the database, and you've broken the system. So do you test what happens on the database? Maybe I missed the answer and you already gave it.
I think I add this again here. So, and also remember the testing strategy shape. So there's the pyramid, there's the cone, and there's the hourglass, right? Depending on the box I draw, if the database is within the box, in my mind, so this is me with my team, of course. If it's within the box, the boundaries of this box, if it's there, I'm not mocking the database, but I'm just sort of how I would test that is that I send like a command that does something on the database. And then I would send maybe another query that would get stuff from the database, and the behavior would be different. Sometimes, having said that, sometimes it makes sense to put the database in certain shape, to add some data in the database first, and then run scripts. Sometimes I just do it like that too. It's like the sending sort of private messages into an object, if you can do in your programming languages. So it sort of depends on what we want to test. Was this clear enough, or was this like confusing?
It's clear. I'm just thinking maybe, I don't know, if your application, if your architecture has something like CQRS, maybe you don't get the luxury of making a query to the service that handles the command. So the only option you have is check on the database if there is an entity, if there is an event, if there is something. If you don't check on the database, maybe you're doing a no operation, but everything seems to work. It's an extreme case, but it's...
Also, what I often think, I don't try to automate everything. I leave room for just like figuring out stuff like myself. I think it highly depends on like the context of what we actually want to automate. So if there is a situation that there's no other ways for me to actually then to go and check what's in the database, and if I want to automate it, sure, I would go into the database, which was also in the in here where Sandimet actually says, don't do this unless it makes sense. So if it makes sense, I'll just do it.
Thank you.
There's one question over there.
We've got two actually, one here.
Talking about the shapes of the hourglass and the pyramid and everything, do you have a preference for one of the shapes?
No. No.
Ah, okay.
I would say it's too much context dependent. And it depends, like how it depends is that if I'm running a microservice like I had here, and in one in the team that we sort of use this, I would say that was more of an hourglass of sort, or testing. Actually, it was more of a testing code. It worked nicely. Actually, worked very nicely. If we work with, let's say, AWS serverless, we might have totally different shape than if I'm making a well-structured monolith. So it's sort of, I know like a good friend of mine does a lot of end-to-end tests on AWS serverless, because you actually can do it, and I created also myself a way how to like build the whole stack and test the actual stack when it's like really high level. So it might be even inverted pyramid in that sense.
You said it depends a bit on the architecture. Are there other things that play a role in deciding for you that shape? I don't know, composition of the team, for example, or other things?
Yeah, of course. There's the composition of team also sort of plays a role in that. So, for example, if a team does not really like unit tests or doesn't or really thinks unit test is just waste of time, it might turn up into something different automatically. I personally love unit tests because that gives me a lot of like and unit test as a design tool, not so much as testing tools. So maybe let's say it that way. One of my preferences is that there will be fat unit test layer.
All right, thanks.
There's one over there.
Okay, we've got another question here in the middle. Oh! Did it hurt when it hit you on the head?
Oh,
Not at all. It's amazing, isn't it?
hi. Thank you for talk. I'm interested in layer of communication and contract testing. So, is there some frameworks or tools automating contract testing?
I've seen used and like with in one product where I was working, we used Pact for contract testing, and that seemed to work very nicely.
Okay, thank you for your recommendation.
I wouldn't say that as a recommendation. That's just more something that I've seen used.
Yeah. Pact's good for like HTTP APIs.
Yes.
That's your boundary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in case of RabbitMQ or some other message queues?
For RabbitMQ, what we also like currently doing, so we're not there yet, but what sort of with contract testing, what we can do is sort of when publishing, and this is sort of work in progress or thinking in progress, so this might be totally off, is sort of when we're publishing the capability and things, so if people are using it, we're also like giving them, here's the test data that we're testing this with. So if you're sending this message, we're returning this to you.
Okay.
Feel free to use this test data in your own test cases.
Thank you.
We have a question right at the back.
Nice, I can throw.
You might need to stand for this throw. Yeah.
You were saying unit tests that the unit tests can grow, right? The squares. But for example, how much can they grow? Because for example, if you have a service and you say that you can spawn across 2 services, then you need to use Docker to spin up the services or the databases. But then, for example, if you are using TDD or something like that, then you need to have your unit tests always running, right? And you don't want to forget Docker running and then, now I need to spin up Docker inside my machine. So aren't we already talking about integration tests if we talk about multiple services or unit tests, as you mentioned? And databases integration, because then I would say that it's already an integration test and not a unit test anymore, even though I understand the unit tests can grow inside the same service. So for example, if you are talking about two classes, two services inside the same running service, or maybe it's just a name thing.
I totally agree with you. If that is sort of whatever you mean, like if that is integration testing for you, I'm with you. If that would be something else named for something else, I would be with them too. So the naming is sort of is a thing. So like if I need database and RabbitMQ and the whole application running at the same time to run the test case, I want the script that sort of spins up everything and sort of that I can then test the sort of the whole box that I have. How I name that, I might just name it also as a big test. So there's a naming in there. So there's like I didn't talk about like how I would unit test stuff here so much. So the name from the naming perspective, I think all these bigger ones here are sort of integration tests or integrated tests or something like that. Was that an answer to your question?
Yeah. So basically, you would exclude them from, for example, if you do a Git push, then you would exclude running them on your local machine, something like that, right? It would be external.
Yeah. So I would have different scripts running the unit tests, which are quick.
Yeah, indeed.
And,
Okay,
and I would have different set of tests that are the slow tests.
Okay.
CI would always run both.
Yes.
But myself, I would be just happy when my unit tests are running.
Indeed.
I would push it, and then I would see soon later like what's the actual result.
Okay, cool. Then that's it. Yeah. Thanks.
I think we have time for one more question or request, if anyone has one. Does anyone else have a question?
There's one more thing I want to say. Let's see if it's here. I think I saw it. There's a lot of magic if we can write the test cases so that I could give this to our, like the financial people, and that if they could read it. When I typically go to see, like I see test cases that do this, that are so difficult to read. Now, I don't know what happens there. But when we have those test cases, and this is what I've seen happening, I just like take them with like so much care, these test cases, and it doesn't take much to make them so that they sort of reveal the intent. So there's magic in writing test cases that that I can give to anyone, and they can read them. I can then use like. And if what I would do with my teams is that I would ask, can you read this? Can you say what's happening? If they don't, guess what we're doing? We'll improve this, right? We'll just make it easier to read. This for me is constant, like I take constant care in writing the test cases so that people understand what I'm actually doing. Cool.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Aki.